Elvis, there have been a lot of rumors about your love life. Did you meet anyone special in Germany?
Not any special one.
For years, Elvis Presley's Cadillac was nothing but a relic, a silent witness to his glory days. But the day mechanics decided to restore it, they uncovered something no one was prepared for. The moment the secret was lifted from its hiding place, everyone froze. It wasn't just an object. It was a message from the king himself. Something that spoke louder than any of his songs. And when the truth surfaced, one question filled the air. Why did Elvis hide this? Join us as we reveal what was hidden for decades. The white Cadillac that held Elvis's hidden heart. Elvis Presley was more than a name on a marquee or a voice that made women faint. He was a tired soul wrapped in sequins and satin, carrying the weight of a million dreams that were never his. Behind the dazzling smile and swinging hips lived a man who craved something simple, something real, something quiet. And on those endless Memphis nights when the world demanded too much and gave back too little, Elvis found his only true friend waiting in the driveway. A 1973 Cadillac Fleetwood, pearl white, pristine, perfect. This car was not like the others he owned. Elvis collected Cadillacs the way some people collected stamps, but this one was different. This one understood him. The white leather seats seemed to wrap around him like gentle arms when he slid inside after another exhausting performance. Elvis would climb into that Cadillac late at night when Graceland grew too quiet or too loud, depending on who was visiting. He never told anyone where he was going because he was not going anywhere at all. Sometimes he would drive slowly through the empty streets of Memphis, watching the city sleep while his mind raced with thoughts he could never speak aloud. The radio would hum softly, playing songs that were not his, and for those precious moments, Elvis was not the king. He was just a man listening to music in his car. Other nights, he would not drive at all. He would sit in the driveway, engine off, windows up, cocooned in that white leather sanctuary. The darkness outside pressed against the glass, but inside there was only him and his thoughts. He kept a small leather notebook tucked beneath the driver's seat, brown and worn, with pages that had absorbed his secrets like thirsty earth drinks rain. Elvis would pull it out and write by the dim glow of the interior light. His handwriting was messy, urgent, as if the words wanted to escape before they burned him from the inside. He wrote about fear, the kind that wakes you at 3 a.m. and whispers that everything you built will crumble. He wrote about being forgotten, about becoming yesterday's news in a world that moved faster than he could keep up. Elvis Presley, who made history with every hip shake, was terrified of becoming history himself. The notebook held confessions he would never make on stage or in interviews. Words about feeling trapped in his legend, about missing the boy he used to be before the world decided who he should become. The Cadillac witnessed things no human ever did. It saw Elvis cry when the pills stopped working and the music stopped making sense. It felt the weight of his head against the steering wheel when exhaustion won another battle. It heard his prayers, whispered into the leather and chrome like sacred offerings to a God who might be listening. Sometimes Elvis would talk to himself, or maybe to the car, or maybe to the ghost of who he used to be. His voice would crack with emotion as he asked questions that had no answers. Why did success feel so much like failure? Why did love always turn into something that hurt? Why was he surrounded by people but felt completely alone? That Cadillac became a living thing in its way. It absorbed his energy, his sadness, his desperate hope that tomorrow might be easier than today. The seats molded to the shape of his body during those long night sessions. The steering wheel knew the exact pressure of his grip when anxiety made his hands shake. Every surface in that car could tell you a story about the real Elvis, the one who existed between performances, between photographs, between the moments when he had to be someone else's dream. He treated that car with tender reverence, keeping it immaculate even as other parts of his life fell into chaos. It represented control in a world that had spun beyond his grasp. Inside those doors, he made the rules. Inside that white cocoon, he could remove the crown that had grown too heavy for any mortal man to wear. Memphis nights rolled by, one after another, and the Cadillac kept his secrets faithfully. It never judged him for crying or for admitting defeat to an empty passenger seat. It never sold his story to the newspapers or whispered his fears to curious ears. It simply existed as his constant companion, his confessor, his escape hatch from a life that sparkled on the outside but ached on the inside. Elvis never imagined that one day, strangers would peer into his sanctuary. He never thought about what might happen to his leather notebook or the traces of himself he left behind in that sacred space. The Cadillac was his present tense, his right now, his only place of peace. And when he sat there in the darkness, writing words that burned with truth, he was finally, completely, honestly himself. Years later, when the Cadillac was finally opened again, something inside it would make the world stop breathing for a moment. But back then, Elvis never imagined anyone would ever find it. The mechanic who kept Elvis's last secret. Thomas had been a mechanic in his younger days, but not just any mechanic. He worked in the private garage at Graceland, maintaining the fleet of Cadillacs that Elvis Presley collected like other men collected watches or stamps. Those days felt like another lifetime now. Thomas's hands, once strong and steady enough to rebuild an engine blindfolded, now shook slightly when he poured his morning coffee. His knees ached when rain was coming. His hearing had faded enough that the television wanted to be turned up louder than it used to be. But his memory remained sharp as ever, especially when it came to those years working for Elvis. He could still recall the exact shade of paint on each vehicle, the particular quirks of every engine, and most importantly, the moods of the man who owned them all. After Elvis passed away in 1977, the estate quietly dispersed various possessions. Some items went to family, others to close friends, and a select few to people who had served Elvis faithfully over the years. Thomas received a midnight blue Cadillac Fleetwood, one of the last cars Elvis had purchased. The gift came with a handwritten note from someone in the estate office, thanking him for his years of dedicated service. Thomas accepted the car with mixed emotions. It was a generous gesture, certainly, but driving it felt wrong somehow, like wearing a dead man's favorite jacket. So he made a decision that seemed right at the time. He would keep the car, but he would not use it. The barn sat about half a mile from his house, on property his father had left him. It was weathered but solid, with gaps between the wooden boards that let thin streams of light penetrate the darkness inside. Thomas drove the Cadillac there one warm afternoon in late 1977, parked it carefully in the center of the barn, and closed the large doors behind him. He locked it up and walked away. Years passed. Then decades. The barn stood quietly while the world changed around it. Thomas never sold the car, despite receiving offers from collectors who somehow learned he possessed it. He always refused, giving the same simple explanation. Some cars carry too much soul to be traded like ordinary merchandise. But time moves forward whether we want it to or not. Thomas turned 70, then 75, then 80. His doctor started using words like decline and limited and preparation. Thomas understood what was being said without the euphemisms. His remaining time could now be measured in seasons rather than decades. He wanted to settle his affairs, to decide what would happen to his possessions after he was gone. The Cadillac could not stay locked in that barn forever. A young collector named Evelyn Carter reached out to him through a mutual contact. She specialized in restoring classic vehicles, particularly those with historical significance. Her voice on the phone carried genuine enthusiasm mixed with deep respect. She was not interested in the car as a trophy or an investment. She wanted to bring it back to life, to honor what it represented. Something in her tone convinced Thomas that she was the right person. They agreed on a price that was fair, but not extravagant. Thomas did not need the money so much as he wanted to know the car would be properly cared for. Before the transfer, Thomas decided to visit the barn one final time. He wanted to say goodbye properly, though he felt slightly foolish admitting this even to himself. It was just a car, after all, just metal, leather, and glass. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. It always has been. The walk to the barn took longer than it used to. His legs moved slowly and his breathing grew heavy, but he made it. The doors protested with rusty squeals when he pulled them open. Sunlight rushed in, illuminating thousands of dust particles that danced and swirled in the disturbed air. The Cadillac sat exactly where he had left it decades ago, now covered in a thick blanket of dust and cobwebs. The midnight blue paint was barely visible beneath the grime, but the shape remained elegant and proud despite the years of neglect. Thomas approached slowly, running his hand along the hood and leaving a clean streak through the dust. Memories came flooding back with such force that he had to steady himself against the fender. He remembered Elvis laughing in the garage, telling jokes while Thomas worked on one of the other cars. He remembered the heavy silences too, the days when Elvis would sit in a vehicle for hours without saying a word, just listening to music on the radio and staring at nothing. Thomas had learned not to interrupt those moments. The man wanted space to think, to feel, to exist away from the constant demands of being Elvis Presley. Standing there in the dusty barn, Thomas felt something strange, a weight in the air, a sense that the car was holding on to something important. He opened the driver's door, which groaned in protest, and slid into the seat. The leather was cracked and faded, but still recognizable. Everything looked mostly as he remembered, except for one detail that caught his attention. The glove compartment had a small silver lock, and beside it, carved carefully into the dashboard, was a tiny emblem. A musical note intertwined with a heart. Thomas leaned closer, squinting in the dim light. He had worked on this car multiple times back in the day, and he did not remember that carving. When did Elvis add it? And why? His fingers reached for the glove compartment handle, but something stopped him. A feeling, instinctive and strong, that whatever lay inside was not meant for his eyes. These were Elvis's final secrets, his private thoughts, his hidden truths. Thomas had been a loyal employee and a trusted mechanic, but this felt like crossing a line. Some boundaries should not be violated, even by good intentions. He climbed out of the car and closed the door gently. Looking at the Cadillac one last time, he spoke softly to the empty barn. Some things belong to the man who left them behind. Let the new owner discover whatever mysteries remained. That was not his responsibility anymore. Thomas arranged for the car to be transported to Evelyn's workshop the following week. He gave her the keys and the title, along with his best wishes for the restoration. He mentioned the locked glove compartment in passing, noting that he never opened it and did not have a key for it. Evelyn thanked him with genuine warmth, promising to treat the vehicle with the respect it deserved. But when the new owner broke the lock weeks later, what lay hidden inside would make even the most loyal fans question how much they truly knew about the king. The truth locked in midnight blue. Evelyn Carter stood in her workshop staring at the midnight blue Cadillac Fleetwood with a mixture of excitement and something she could not quite name. The car had arrived that morning on a flatbed truck, covered in decades of dust and neglect, yet somehow still magnificent. The air around the Cadillac seemed thick and heavy, as though the atmosphere inside and surrounding it still belonged to someone who had left this world long ago. Evelyn was not like most Elvis fans. She did not collect memorabilia or attend tribute concerts. She did not cover her walls with posters or know every song by heart. What fascinated her was the man beneath the legend, the human being who must have felt real pain and joy and loneliness despite all the screaming crowds and flashing cameras. She wanted to understand the person, not worship the icon. This car represented a direct connection to that hidden humanity, and the responsibility of caring for it felt almost sacred. Her first approach was slow and reverent. She walked a complete circle around the vehicle, taking in every detail before touching anything. The midnight blue paint had faded and dulled under layers of grime, but the elegant lines of the Fleetwood remained unmistakable. When she finally reached out and opened the driver's door, the hinges protested with a low groan that echoed through the quiet workshop. A rush of trapped air escaped, carrying scents that made her heart beat faster. Old cologne, the expensive kind that men wore in the 70s, hung faintly in the stale atmosphere. Tobacco had soaked into every fabric surface over the years, leaving its ghostly signature. But underneath those obvious smells was something else, something harder to identify. Perhaps it was simply the scent of time itself, or maybe it was the lingering essence of the man who once sat in this exact spot, thinking thoughts that no one else could hear. She slid carefully into the driver's seat, feeling like an intruder entering someone's private sanctuary. The white leather had cracked badly with age, splitting in places to reveal the yellowed foam padding underneath. But Evelyn found this damage beautiful rather than sad. Each crack told a story about the weight and pressure of a body sitting here repeatedly. These were the marks left by Elvis himself, evidence of nights spent alone in this space seeking refuge from a world that demanded everything and understood nothing. The steering wheel showed wear in two specific spots where thumbs naturally rested during long periods of gripping. The dashboard had faded from its original brightness to a softer cream color, and there, etched into the surface near the radio, she noticed something that made her breath catch. A tiny emblem had been carved into the plastic with careful precision, a musical note intertwined with a heart. Beside it, almost invisible unless you knew where to look, were the initials EP. The first week passed quickly as Evelyn worked through the initial cleaning process. She moved slowly and deliberately, using soft cloths and gentle cleaning solutions, trying to preserve rather than erase the patina of age. The car began revealing its secrets gradually. A dried pen wedged deep between the seats, a faded parking receipt in the door pocket from a Memphis restaurant that no longer existed, loose change that had fallen through a tear in the upholstery. Each small discovery felt like unwrapping a gift from the past. But her attention kept returning to the glove compartment. Thomas had mentioned it during their final conversation before the transfer, noting casually that it remained locked and he had never opened it. The small silver keyhole stared at her every time she sat in the driver's seat, and what had started as simple curiosity slowly transformed into something more urgent and uncomfortable. An unease grew in her chest whenever she looked at that locked door. What could be inside? Why had it been sealed away? Did she have the right to open something that Elvis clearly wanted to keep private? For 3 full days, Evelyn tried to ignore the locked compartment and focus on other restoration work. She cleaned the exterior, treated the leather, and checked the engine components. But the mystery pulled at her constantly, invading her thoughts even when she was away from the workshop. Finally, she made a decision. She would open it, but she would do so with the utmost care and respect. This was not about satisfying idle curiosity. This was about understanding the complete story of the vehicle and the man who owned it. She selected her tools carefully, choosing the smallest and most precise instruments from her collection. Working on the lock felt like performing delicate surgery. She did not want to damage anything or force her way in violently. After nearly 2 hours of patient effort, she heard the soft click of the mechanism releasing. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled the small door open, revealing the dark interior of the compartment. 3 items sat inside, arranged with obvious intention as though someone had placed them there knowing they would remain hidden for a very long time. A small velvet pouch in deep purple, soft despite its age. A letter, sealed with red wax that had cracked over the decades but still held the envelope closed. And a photograph, folded once down the middle to fit the small space. Evelyn lifted each item out with trembling fingers, treating them like ancient artifacts that might crumble at rough handling. She unfolded the photograph first and felt her pulse quicken with recognition and confusion. Elvis stood there, looking younger and healthier than in his final years, with his arm wrapped around a woman. She was beautiful in a natural, unpretentious way, smiling at the camera with genuine happiness that lit up her entire face. Evelyn had studied thousands of Elvis photographs during her research, had seen images of him with countless women over the years, but never this person. She was not Priscilla. She was not any of the famous actresses or singers he had been linked with publicly. This woman was a complete mystery, unknown to history and unmentioned in any biography. The letter came next. The red wax seal broke easily under her careful pressure, falling away in small fragments. The paper inside was thick and expensive, the kind people used for important correspondence they wanted to last. The handwriting was unmistakably Elvis's. Evelyn had studied his penmanship enough to recognize the distinctive way he formed his letters, the particular slant and pressure of his pen. No date appeared anywhere on the pages. Instead of a proper name at the top, 3 words served as the only greeting: my heart's keeper. Evelyn began reading and felt the world around her fade away. Elvis wrote about love with a raw honesty that shattered all the careful images he had cultivated for public consumption. He confessed to feeling trapped inside his fame, like a beautiful bird locked in a golden cage that everyone admired but no one thought to open. He wrote about the simple life he had abandoned when the world decided he belonged to everyone and therefore to no one. His words carried deep regret about choices made and paths not taken. He expressed fear that people would never see past the sequined jumpsuits and hip swivels to recognize the frightened, lonely man underneath who got tired and sad and desperate just like everybody else. The letter ended with a single short line that contained more sorrow than entire volumes of poetry. Those few final words hung in the air of the workshop, impossible to ignore and impossible to forget. Evelyn sat frozen in the driver's seat as afternoon light filtered through the windows and painted golden streaks across the midnight blue hood. In her shaking hands, she held something that no museum had cataloged, no Elvis expert had mentioned, no documentary filmmaker had uncovered. These were his private words, sealed away and untouched for decades, speaking truths he never shared with concert audiences or magazine interviewers. The intimacy of the letter overwhelmed her. Should this be made public? Did fans deserve to know these secrets? Or was this confession meant to remain hidden forever, a private conversation between Elvis and whoever the mysterious heart's keeper had been? The question tormented her as she sat in the gathering shadows. The letter felt too personal, too raw, too sacred to put on display. Yet it also felt wrong to bury it again, to let Elvis's honest words remain unheard when he had clearly wanted to express them. As the sun fell across the Cadillac's hood that evening, Evelyn realized she was holding not just a letter, but the last truth Elvis Presley ever tried to tell. The car that kept a king's final secret. The midnight blue Cadillac had witnessed everything. It had carried Elvis through some of his darkest nights and loneliest moments when the weight of fame became too heavy for any human soul to bear. Now, decades after his passing, the car stood in Evelyn's workshop holding the scattered pieces of a story that nobody knew existed. The letter, the photograph, the velvet pouch. 3 simple objects that together painted a picture of love and loss that the world had never seen. Evelyn sat in the driver's seat for hours after discovering the hidden compartment's contents, trying to understand what she had found. The letter had shaken her deeply with its raw honesty and pain, but the other items held mysteries of their own. She picked up the small purple velvet pouch next, feeling its weight in her palm. The fabric was soft and expensive, the kind used to protect precious jewelry. Her fingers trembled slightly as she loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into her hand. A gold pendant tumbled out, catching the workshop light and glowing warmly against her skin. It was shaped like a heart, delicate and beautifully crafted, clearly custom-made by a skilled jeweler. Evelyn turned it over carefully and found tiny initials engraved on the back. 2 letters intertwined so elegantly that they almost looked like a single symbol. These were not Elvis's initials. They belonged to someone else, someone whose identity remained hidden in the folds of history. She looked again at the photograph of Elvis with the mysterious woman, studying every detail with fresh understanding. The pendant must have belonged to her, but who was she? Evelyn spent the next several days researching, calling contacts who knew about Elvis's life, searching through archives and old records. Finally, a former Graceland employee provided the answer. The woman was a nurse who had cared for Elvis during his final years when his health deteriorated, and he wanted constant medical attention. She had been kind and gentle, treating him not as a superstar, but as a regular person who deserved dignity and compassion. Their relationship had remained private, a quiet connection that existed away from cameras and gossip columns. Understanding flooded through Evelyn as all the pieces came together. Elvis had loved this woman in a way that was pure and simple, unmarred by the complications that fame brought to every other aspect of his life. The letter had been written to her, the heart's keeper, pouring out feelings he could never express publicly. He had placed these precious items in the locked glove compartment of his Cadillac, the one place that felt truly his, knowing they would stay hidden unless someone eventually restored the car. It was a message in a bottle, cast into the future, a testament of love that could only be discovered after enough time had passed for the truth to no longer hurt anyone. The realization of what she held changed everything for Evelyn. This was not a historical artifact meant for public display. This was a sacred trust, a private moment between 2 people who had found each other in impossible circumstances. The intimacy of it felt too precious to expose to the harsh light of media attention and public curiosity. Elvis had given the world his voice, his music, his performances, his image. But this love, this final honest expression of his heart, belonged only to him and the woman who had seen him as simply a man. Evelyn made her decision. She would seal everything back inside the glove compartment exactly as she had found it. The letter would not be published. The photograph would not be shared. The pendant would remain tucked safely in its velvet pouch. Some love stories were too pure to be disturbed by curious hands and hungry eyes. The Cadillac, which had served as a witness to Elvis's loneliness and pain throughout his life, would now become a resting place for his truth and tenderness. But before she locked it all away again, Evelyn decided to take the car for one drive. She wanted to honor what she had discovered, to acknowledge the weight of the secret she now carried. On a quiet evening, when Memphis streets were nearly empty, she slid behind the wheel and turned the key. The engine came to life with a smooth purr that surprised her after so many years of silence. She drove slowly through the old neighborhoods, past places where Elvis had once lived and worked and played. The radio played softly, filling the car with music from his era. Warm golden light from the setting sun streamed through the windows. As she drove, Evelyn felt something strange and beautiful. A warmth surrounded her that had nothing to do with the evening temperature. It felt almost like a presence, gentle and grateful, as if some part of Elvis's spirit lingered in this vehicle that had been his sanctuary. Maybe it was just her imagination, or maybe some emotions are so powerful they leave permanent marks on the places where they were felt most deeply. Either way, she sensed that the man who had once gripped this steering wheel during his darkest hours had finally found peace. She parked the Cadillac back in her workshop as the sun disappeared below the horizon. The world outside grew quiet and still. Inside the car, the letter rested in its sealed envelope. The photograph lay folded, and the gold pendant gleamed softly in its velvet pouch. Words that would never be read aloud but would always be remembered by the one person who had found them. A love that the world never knew existed, but that had been real and true and worth protecting. What do you think about Elvis Presley's hidden secret? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Don't forget to like, follow, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click on the following video on your screen. You will enjoy it.